Right now, I'm lying under the bed in my bedroom, and something incredible is happening above me. I hear loud moans from my wife, Alice, and faint moans from Carl Parks, who is my wife's personal trainer. After the birth of our daughter, Frances, Alice lost her shape and wanted to get back in shape. So, I found the best trainer in town for her, paying him a significant amount to work with my wife in the gym. However, I never imagined that their fitness sessions would extend right into our bedroom. Now, lying under the bed, ready to execute my revenge plan, I reflect on how I ended up in this situation and how my wife chose to cheat on me with her personal trainer in our own home. I am Harold Randall, a successful engineer. 15 years of work in the company have borne fruit. I acquired a good car, a house, and could afford to travel. I always believed that a woman is a generator for a man. After all, a man doesn't need much, but a woman demands a lot. So when I met Alice in college, I immediately went to work to give her the best of everything. We had ups and downs, but what truly inspired me was that Alice stayed with me through thick and thin. Even when I couldn't afford to pay for the house and there was a risk of eviction, Alice still supported me and remained loyal, and I deeply appreciate that in her. When our life became stable with a steady income, we began to think about starting a complete family. My salary covered all our basic needs, and we could even save money. Therefore, Alice quit her job and started living for her pleasure. I didn't hesitate to spend money on her entertainment because I understood how important it was for my woman to be happy and maintain her well-being. Darling, I have wonderful news for you. Yes. What is it? We did it. I lifted Alice in my arms, and we twirled in place. I was excessively happy. Finally, I was going to be a dad. Alice and I immediately delved into books and documentaries for expectant parents, toasting to our future roles. It was a golden time, but the coolest event was the gender reveal party where we invited all our relatives and friends. There we found out we were having a girl, and we began debating the baby's name. I want her to be named Joyce. Don't you think that's somewhat common? Okay, then suggest your option. Let's name her Frances. I like it. Let's go with that. So, we agreed that we would name our future daughter Frances. As the due date approached, I noticed how Alice became increasingly saddened about her figure. For her, it was real stress. She had always kept herself in shape and looked beautiful throughout her life. Now she feels like she's aged and doesn't appear as attractive as before. Darling, forget about it. You're the most beautiful to me. No, Harold, I look terrible. Look at my cheeks, legs. It's a disaster. These pregnancy workouts are not helping at all. Yes, I was paying for her weekly prenatal workouts where women engaged in low-impact exercises with a coach. Honestly, I didn't care much about Alice's appearance due to her biological changes during pregnancy. She gained weight significantly, but there was nothing to be done about it. I reassured her every day that it's normal, and even the doctors told her so, but she continued to be upset. After Frances was born, Alice became even more hysterical. It was as if someone had replaced her. Instead of spending more time with our child, she worked out at home every day and refused to eat, arguing that it was to become slim faster. You need to eat for milk, understand? Nothing bad will happen if Frances consumes formula. There's nothing terrible about it. In the end, after a month, Alice lost her milk, and we had to feed Frances with formula, which didn't make me very happy. I wanted Alice to fulfill her maternal duties as we agreed in the beginning, but instead, she constantly threw tantrums and spent minimal time with the baby. I started worrying about Frances, so I had to hire a nanny who came several times a week to sit with Frances while Alice tried to regain her former shape. When Frances turned 4 months old, Alice decided to talk to me. Harold, I can't lose the extra weight. I want to go back to the gym to make my workouts more effective. Why don't you like working out at home? At home, it's not effective. I only have one ball on a mat, and that's not enough for efficiency. Okay, but I'll pay for the gym only after consulting with a doctor." A few days later, a cheerful Alice came to me, providing a doctor's note allowing her to resume workouts, and I agreed to pay for her gym membership. It bothered me that Alice, as a mother, spent little time with the child and shifted all her responsibilities onto the nanny. For a child, it's crucial to have the mother around in the first year of life, and this situation seemed absurd. I didn't want to fill my head with negative thoughts. I just wanted Alice to return to being the cheerful and loving person she was before. I even suggested that she see a psychologist, thinking that she might be experiencing postpartum depression, but she dismissed it, saying she was fine and everything was good. One day, Alice approached me saying she needed a personal trainer because she hadn't exercised for over a year and needed to catch up on missed workouts and remember all the exercises. I wanted to find her a reliable trainer, but a couple of days later she showed me a photo of Carl Parks, who had an excellent reputation as a personal trainer, customizing individual and effective workout programs for each client. Alice said she had already had a free trial session with him and really liked it. At that moment, I saw a genuine smile on her face for the first time, so I immediately gave her money to pay for the trainer for several months in advance. Over time, things got better. Alice started getting back in shape and even became more attractive, lifting her mood and finally spending more time with our daughter, Frances. Our pastel life became even better than before. I didn't even recognize her. She moved so gracefully that I was simply in awe of her. Life seemed to return to normal. We had a beautiful daughter growing up. My wife was happy, and I worked to provide for my family. What could be better? A year had passed since Alice started training with Carl Parks, and our daughter Frances turned exactly 1.5 years old. I saw wonderful results in Alice. She became more lively and energetic. I realized she no longer needed a trainer since she could easily maintain her shape. "Alice, you are incredibly beautiful, but don't you think it's time to stop training with a coach? You have achieved good results. I can still pay for classes, but I don't see the need for it anymore, considering how expensive it is. I can't stop the training. Otherwise, this year of workouts would have been meaningless." "Why? You know how to exercise, and I don't see the need for a trainer." "You don't understand. I need a trainer." Our argument lasted about an hour, and Alice eventually convinced me that she needed the trainer. Over time, instead of 2 sessions a week, they started meeting 3 times a week, and I continued to pay for it. Even though I didn't see much sense in these workouts, I decided to compromise. After all, my wife was happy, and that was the most important thing. It continued for a year. Frances was now 2.5 years old, and Alice had been training with this trainer for 2 years in total. If a year ago I saw excellent results in Alice, now I didn't. She seemed to have even gained weight, started eating more unhealthy food, and so on. Moreover, Alice continued to train regularly 3 times a week, but it seemed like there was no progress. This was the first red flag for me. I wasn't a jealous person and trusted my wife, at least because she didn't give me any reason not to. She showed care towards me. We had great sex, but I felt that something was off. First, I decided to check her sports bag while Alice was sleeping. I carefully got out of bed, took her bag, and brought it to the kitchen to examine it. In the bag, I found the usual sports gear, a change of shoes, a towel, and a water bottle. But my attention was drawn to a small pocket that seemed inconspicuous. Opening it, I found a condom. This struck me as strange because Alice and I never used contraceptives or condoms. I decided not to tell Alice anything, so I took out a black marker and left a barely visible black dot on the condom, let's call it a mark, and put it back. As I continued to inspect the bag, I heard Alice coming down from the 2nd floor. I couldn't think of anything better than hiding the bag under the coffee table. "Why aren't you sleeping, dear?" "We ran out of water upstairs, so I came down to get some." "That's great because I was thirsty." We filled the water and went back upstairs, lying down to sleep again. However, I couldn't fall asleep because I had to return the bag to its place. After an hour, I went downstairs, retrieved the bag, checked Frances, and went to sleep. But I couldn't sleep because thoughts swirled in my head. How could a condom end up in my wife's sports bag? It bothered me. The next day, everything seemed normal. I got ready for work, and Alice planned to spend the entire day at home with Frances. Not wanting to be foolish while at work, I called the good lawyer Douglas Sanford. He reassured me and advised against jumping to conclusions. "Mr. Randall, first, we need to gather enough evidence for your peace of mind. I'll connect you with my private detective, and you'll provide him with all the information about your wife. I'm sure he'll start working in a few days. The most important thing for you is to continue living a normal life and not raise suspicions with your wife. Are you on board?" I supported Mr. Sanford's idea and sent all my data to the new private detective. He asked for more information, specifically which gym Alice goes to. But I didn't even know that. The private detective reassured me, saying he would find out. I was surprised that he was ready to start working the next day. I returned home, and my wife was already there, having prepared dinner for me, and put our little Frances to bed. Everything was fine, and we lived this way for 2 weeks. During this time, neither Mr. Sanford nor the private detective contacted me, which gave me hope that my wife was faithful. One night, I decided to check Alice's sports bag, where I found a completely different condom, without any mark. I immediately sent this information to my private detective, and by the next morning, he texted me the date and time for our meeting. I arrived at the specified time, and the private detective handed me a large folder with materials from 3 weeks of work. I was surprised at how heavy it was. We sat in a cafe, and the detective told me everything he had discovered. He presented me with 30 photos, 2 videos, and 5 pages of detailed notes about my wife's movements. Throughout all this time, my wife never once visited the gym. Instead, she met her trainer on neutral territory. They would dine together and then retreat to an expensive hotel, spending a couple of hours together before my wife returned home. There were also several days when Alice didn't go anywhere, and the trainer came directly to our house, leaving after 2 hours. I was shocked by all this information. The private detective also noted that Alice met with the trainer not only on scheduled training days, but could spend time together while I was at work, and our daughter was with the nanny. I was plunged into deep despair. Had I been so blind? The private detective also gathered information about Carl Parks, spending most of his time monitoring him. It turned out that my wife was not Carl Parks' only victim. There were at least 5 other women with whom he regularly met in different hotels. Interestingly, Carl Parks had a wife and 3 children, a family man who engaged in sexual activities with his clients during working hours and earned money from it. He had quite an elaborate setup. "Mr. Randall, I believe this information is enough to punish not only Carl, but also your wife. There's no need for further surveillance. You need to consult with your lawyer and consider the next course of action." I pulled out an envelope with money and added a few hundred more for the detective's work. I hadn't expected such swift and efficient work. After the meeting with the detective, I called my lawyer, Mr. Sanford, to discuss the next steps. "Everything depends on what you want. With all this information, you'll be in a winning position. Can we make them suffer more?" I asked, and the lawyer grinned. We agreed to meet the next day, and in the meantime, he would prepare a plan in which I would be in a winning position. I wanted to punish Alice for breaking bows and deceiving me so brazenly. I didn't want to be a fool, so I definitely wouldn't pity her. I had a week to prepare for the expulsory. Most of all, I wanted to punish the trainer. I was convinced that he was responsible for my wife's infidelity. While she could have chosen not to cheat on me, I was angriest at the trainer for his incompetence and misuse of his professional position. What was he thinking when he had a wife and children waiting for him at home? I rented a couple of hidden surveillance cameras and installed them in our home. I suggested to Alice that Frances go to her grandparents for the weekend, and Alice happily agreed. I also paid the private detective for more information about the trainer. When I had laid the foundation for the most significant show of my life, I waited for the signal. On that day, Alice was supposed to go for a workout while I left for work in the morning. However, I didn't go to work. I took a few days off and pretended in the morning while Alice was still asleep that I was getting ready for work. I lay under our bed, not knowing how much time I would have to stay there, but realizing that Alice might want to meet the trainer at a hotel. For that scenario, we had our plan. While Alice went about her routine, I lay under the bed, simultaneously communicating with the detective and the lawyer. After 2 hours, the detective informed me that the trainer was moving by taxi towards my house, and it pleased me. Watching through the cameras on my phone, I saw Alice let the trainer into the house, close the door, and jump into his arms, passionately kissing. At that moment, I wanted to get up and give him a good beating, but I stuck to the plan. For about 20 minutes, Alice and the trainer indulged in passion in the living room, and already half naked, they headed upstairs. I saw the door open and 2 bodies entering the room, quickly falling onto the bed. I listened as my wife enjoyed herself. I had never seen her like this with me, and it made me sad. I felt humiliated as my wife cheated on me right above me while I lay motionless, needing to endure it. I deliberately didn't open the camera in the bedroom to avoid seeing it. As time passed, I realized they had started the actual process. I could hear Alice enjoying it. Finally, through the cameras, I saw my friend Joshua greet the coach's wife at the front door with her 2 adult children. He asked them to wait. You might wonder how I convinced them to come to my house. It was simple. My lawyer contacted Mrs. Parks and asked her, along with the kids, to come to my house to witness her husband's infidelity. Mrs. Parks was a beautiful and athletic woman, no less than those with whom her husband was unfaithful, and I even felt sorry for her. After 5 minutes, Alice's parents arrived. I invited them under the pretext of a regular meeting, realizing they probably wouldn't believe in their daughter's infidelity. When the crowd gathered near the house, I gave Joshua the green light to quietly lead all the guests into my bedroom, and the operation began. I lay under the bed, nauseated by everything happening above me. The bed was bouncing so much that it hit my knees, and I wanted to get out of there as soon as possible. Suddenly, the bedroom door swung open, and Alice's parents entered the room, followed by Mrs. Parks, who decided to leave the children in the corridor. I heard the moan stop, and complete silence ensued. I looked at the cameras and saw the entire scene. Alice and the coach froze in one pose, as did everyone present. "What are you all doing here?" Alice cried in tears, not understanding what was happening. At that moment, I crawled out from under the bed and handed Alice the divorce papers. She didn't say a word and started crying. These 2 looked like pathetic animals caught in a cage with no way out. The coach tried to wrap himself in a blanket and say something, but I took the blanket from him and said, "You scumbag, return all the money that was spent on you for the past 2 years. Got it?" Mrs. Parks started crying and ran out of the room. The coach wanted to run after her, but Alice's father stopped him and gave him a punch in the face, causing him to fall. I decided to leave since everything was done. I told Alice to gather her things and that I didn't want to see her here in the evening. I walked out of the room. I tried to calm Mrs. Parks, assuring her that everything would be okay. I had to show her all the evidence that her husband was not only cheating on her with 1 woman. Later that day, I spoke to Alice's parents, and they said they would take her home for re-education. Her father was extremely displeased with his daughter. I explained to him that she fell under the influence of a manipulator and a fraudster. In the evening, I returned home, and it was empty. During my absence, my lawyer and I filed 2 cases in court, one for divorce proceedings and the other against Carl Parks, accusing him of fraud. My lawyer explained that we needed to find information about other women. If it turned out that they were also married, we could hold him accountable for more serious charges. In the evening, Alice's father called me and apologized for his daughter's behavior. He expressed sympathy towards me, having experienced a similar situation with his first wife, who cheated on him a few days after their wedding. However, my situation was worse. My wife had deceived me for 2 years, and I wanted justice to prevail. After 2 months, the court proceedings took place, and Alice and I officially divorced. According to the court's decision, Frances was to live with me, and Alice could visit her on weekends. So every week, I take Frances to her grandparents, trying to avoid crossing paths with Alice, who sought reconciliation with me. Still, her father defended me, and they supported me. 3 months later, after all the evidence was gathered, there was a trial against Carl Parks. The court ruled that he had to pay the full cost of his services to all the affected men. He wasn't sent to prison, but he lost the most valuable thing in his life, his family. His ex-wife, April, eventually moved in with me along with her children. She sold her house, received a share of the money, and together, we decided to sell my house, buy a new one, and renovate it. We couldn't stay in the house where our partners betrayed us, so it was the right decision. Alice lost the life she had, and she had to get a job. Her father was very disappointed in her, so it was evident she wasn't having an easy time. As for Carl Parks, he lost his job entirely. Once the best coach, he became an outcast when his inappropriate actions with his students came to light. I was glad that everyone got what they deserved. After some time, I decided to propose to April, and now she officially became Mrs. Randall. April and I grew very close, and our children get along well. I appreciate that April is a homemaker, and she doesn't need much for happiness. I believe that none of us will ever consider infidelity again, knowing the traumatic experience it brings. The only thing that bothers me now is how I'll explain to my daughter Frances why her real mother doesn't live with us. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.